Hi, I'm retired NYPD Detective Vic Ferrari, and welcome to NYPD Through the Looking Glass podcast, where you get unique insight into the New York City Police Department. Before we get started, I encourage you to check out my Amazon author page, where you'll find my series of behind-the-scenes NYPD books. They're $10 paperback or $2.99 ebook download, including my latest NYPD, Presumption and Dysfunction. I realize it's early in the week. I usually release an episode on Thursday or Friday, but I had a little extra time to prepare for a couple extra episodes, so I'm going to release one today on Monday, and then hopefully I'll have another one out on Thursday. And I got a really interesting story about a guy that went missing and his wife was murdered, and took 7 years to close this case. But before we get to that, let's get to the true crime section. Authorities in the Philippines are searching for 34 missing men who were accused of cheating while betting on live stream cockfights during the COVID pandemic. It's believed that the men were killed and dumped in a volcanic lake called Taal Lake by a group of 6 security guards. One of the suspects has come forward in an interview claiming that they killed and disposed of more than 100 bodies. The suspect, identified under the alias as Totoy, implied the men were strangled to death with a wire before they were disposed of. He hinted that authorities would uncover the more than 100 victims if they searched, saying, "It's not just missing cockfighting enthusiasts who are thrown in there. It's even drug lords." Then if you're what can I say other than if you're visiting the Philippines, don't cheat on a cockfight? Bizarre story. This one's even crazier. An unhinged Lowe's employee shot and killed his coworker as he operated a forklift during a midnight shift at the hardware store. Then bizarrely confessed to the murder in an email to Human Resources. Christopher Watsensky, 36 years old, allegedly unloaded multiple shots at 44-year-old Jeff Moeller while he was working at a Lowe's in Scranton, Pennsylvania around 12:30 a.m. Saturday, according to a criminal complaint obtained by the Scranton Times-Tribune. Officers found Moeller, a father of 3 who was struck twice in the head and once in the back in critical condition. Watensky admitted that he shot Moeller, who was on the forklift, in the chest from about 5 feet away. Moeller fell out of the machine and pleaded for his life with the suspect as he struggled on the floor. Watensky was charged with first and third degree murder and is being held on no bail at Lackawanna County Prison. Unbelievable. Daredevil scaled the towering Roosevelt Island tram Monday evening and had to be brought down by cops in climbing gear, according to police in shocking footage. The 20-year-old suspect was seen nonchalantly walking back and forth along the gangway of the tram's 250-foot support tower on the Manhattan side. The brave cops, probably emergency service, who reached the tower's peak and secured the 20-year-old in safety gear and brought him down to ground level without injury. Paramedics took the thrill-seeker suspect to Weill Cornell Medical Center, where they probably put him in the loony bin. Police did not identify him, and charges were pending as of Monday night. So yeah, they had him in psychiatric care. The last time someone climbed the Roosevelt Island tram was Rutger Hauer, a.k.a. Wolfgar, in Nighthawks with Sylvester Stallone. A Florida man has been arrested for allegedly breaking into a stranger's house for days to avoid his angry wife. The Polk County Sheriff's Office was called June 9th regarding reports of lights being left inside a rental property in Davenport. When authorities arrived around 10 p.m., the officers found Jocelyn Charles inside, with the 44-year-old admitting to breaking into the property days ago. Found Joe inside, cooking, and he had just finished filling the tub for a bath. Joel told authorities he had gotten into a fight with his wife. He didn't want to go home, so he chose to burglarize someone else's house instead, the sheriff's office said. 1 person was killed and 9 others injured when gunfire tore through a massive crowd at a Juneteenth celebration near a VFW hall in South Carolina Saturday night. Gunfire erupted and caused hundreds of panicked partygoers to flee, leaving behind shoes, debris, and extensions in the roadway, the Anderson County Sheriff's Office said. The sole fatality, 35-year-old LaPorchira Janae Gray Cobb, died at the scene from a gunshot wound to the abdomen. Another victim was flown to Greenville Memorial Hospital, and at least 8 others were taken to local hospitals in the Anderson and Greenville area, cops said. This new holiday looks like a success. So one of my hobbies is I go on these websites of missing persons and cold cases. I just find it interesting. And I was on one of these sites the other day, and I was looking at Florida missing persons because now I live in the Sunshine State. And it said that this guy, Christopher Benedetto, was missing from 1998. And he was a retired New York City police officer. So immediately that grabbed my attention. And it said he went on a fishing boat and foul play is suspected and all this stuff. But the more I started digging into it, it was a really interesting story. And it turns out Christopher Benedetto was not a retired New York City police officer, but he had 2 brothers that were New York City police officers that are retired from the job. And he had a cousin who was a New York City a retired New York City detective, and then he became a Titusville police officer. So it's a really interesting story about greed. Christopher D. Benedetto and his wife, Janet Pirro, lived on Singer Island in Riviera Beach. And on November 11th, 1998, Benedetto went fishing. Later on in the day, his boat is found docked behind a house on Bimini Lane in Singer Island. Now, the motor was left running, and thousands of dollars of fishing equipment was left inside. So later that night, he and his wife don't show up for a dinner party. So, people are making phone calls. Are you okay? Everything. 3 days later, on November 15th, a neighbor who hadn't seen the couple and had a spare key takes a look inside, and at first glance, everything in the house looks fine. So that same neighbor calls Christopher D. Benedetto's brother, Michael, a retired NYPD detective, and Paul, he was a Nassau County cop, and the cousin Arthur, who was a retired NYPD detective, and says, hey, listen, Christopher hasn't been seen, Jeanette hasn't been seen, maybe you guys want to come down there. So the family comes down, and they're trying to fill out a missing persons report, and there's a news story about it, and a few days later, the Riviera police receive a phone call from an Embassy Suites hotel in Palm Beach Shores, and an employee who's following the case on television spots Christopher D. Benedetto's 1996 Toyota 4Runner in this large hotel parking lot. So the cops show up, they take the car, and now they're processing it for evidence. So while that's going on, the police will also obtain a search warrant for the couple's house, their boat, and their BMW. So it sounds like Christopher Benedetto and his wife were doing quite well for themselves when they disappeared. So now the family from New York comes down to Florida. They have the keys to the house, and they set up a command post in the missing couple's house. And they're putting up flyers and making phone calls and searching the area, and they're coming up empty. So the cops arrive to do this search warrant to process the house, which by this point it's a moot point because everybody's been inside the house. So fingerprints, all that goes out the window. So just before the family's going to leave, they notice that in the garage there's like a meat freezer, like a 3-foot by 3-foot meat freezer, and it's kind of hidden under a workbench, and there was a BMW parked up against it. They had kind of missed it the first couple of days. So since Christopher was a fisherman, they figured there was bait inside. They were going to unplug the freezer and take whatever crap was out there and dispose of it. When one of the brothers opens up the freezer, he finds the wife, Jeanette Pirro, folded over, frozen solid, inside the freezer, and probably this poor guy's going to have nightmares for the rest of his life. So other than Jeanette Pirro's frozen body, the house didn't yield any clues. And like I said, between the neighbors touching everything and the family in there was a moot point to dust for prints and everything. So then the cops start looking at the boat. So in this neighborhood where they found the boat, it's like a beach community, and everyone's basically got a boat moored in back of their house. And I guess one of the neighbors, he would park his boat in the slip. So when they find the boat, and like I said, it was running with equipment in it, the police also realized that the boat is spotless. It's been wiped clean. So Christopher D. Benedetto's cousin Arthur is basically the liaison with the police and the news media. He comments to a reporter that his cousin Christopher had received a $2 million settlement as a result of a 1989 construction accident. And he was pretty sure that money was the motivating factor for his cousin's disappearance and his sister-in-law's murder. Now, I'm not big on counting anyone's money, but everything I read, Christopher Benedetto and his wife were enjoying their retirement. They had moved to Florida from Flushing, Queens. They paid $60,000 for a BMW 740i. They paid $151,000 for their house on Singer Island. They had that 4Runner, and they also had a 30-foot boat, and they had just started a brokerage business. So salute. I mean, I'm not knocking these people in any way. I'm just saying they're retired and they're enjoying themselves. So in early December of 98, that's Jeanette Pirro's family holds a funeral in New Jersey. That's where she was from originally. And up to this point, Christopher Benedetto was missing. So the police are still considering him a suspect at this point. So 4 months later, in March of 1999, and they really don't have any clues, Christopher Benedetto's brother-in-law, a guy by the name of Michael Coblin, he's 49 years old, of Brick, New Jersey, on the Jersey Shore, is found beaten half to death in a parking lot in West Orange. Not only that, he was dragged approximately 200 feet by a car, and he was left half naked. His pants were torn off. Now, he was in critical condition with severe brain swelling, but cops didn't think robbery was a factor because all his possessions, his keys, his wallet, he had it on him. So remember earlier when I said Christopher Benedetto's cousin, the retired NYPD detective, said money or a shady business deal might be the motive for his cousin's disappearance and the death of his sister-in-law. Well, now the investigators from Riviera Beach and the feds, the U.S. Attorney's Office in Florida, go up to Jersey, and now they're going to start asking questions. But at the time, they can't speak to Michael Coblin because he's in a coma. So as the cops are processing this thing up down in Florida, released to the press, things were released in staggered amounts, and I understand why, but it's frustrating when you're trying to research this. Police say that $70,000 worth of jewelry was stolen from the Benedetto household at the time of his wife's murder. The article goes on to say that Michael Coblin is married to Chris Benedetto's deceased wife, Jeanette Piero's sister, Regina. Jeanette is also godmother to his sister and Michael Coblin's son. So it's a close family on the surface. But then there's an interview, and Coblin's brother, Michael, says that Christopher Benedetto had invested money in his brother's fledgling trucking business he owned called Mark Transport in Hackensack, New Jersey. And the company returned empty cosmetic bottles across 3 states. So now witnesses are starting to come forward in drips and drabs, and people that live in Riviera Beach say that Christopher Benedetto and his brother-in-law were tight, and they would go fishing a lot. I mean, it was nothing for him to come up there, and they would go on fishing trips. But by now, investigators are focusing on Michael Coblin as the suspect, and they find out that creditors are suing Michael Coblin's trucking company, and the company's insurance has been canceled. And then when Michael Coblin awakes from his coma, he tells cops he doesn't remember anything. He doesn't remember what he was doing in West Orange, New Jersey, and who could be responsible for his sister-in-law's death and the disappearance of his brother-in-law. Now, Michael Coblin's a big guy. It's about 6'2", 280. So it would take more than 1 or 2 guys to tune him up. So this is going on and on and on. 2 years after Christopher Benedetto vanished, his sister Nancy sues Michael Coblin for $165,000 in business loans from 95 to 98 that were never repaid. That's a lot of money to lend your brother-in-law. And as strange as this case is, it's about to get stranger. The Benedetto family, who wants answers, and they're really on the cops' asses, they want to liquefy Christopher Benedetto's assets to offer a $100,000 reward leading up to the information that breaks this case. Well, murder victim Jeanette Piero's sister, Michael Coblin's wife, and mother go to court to block them from doing it. Now, why would you do that? Who gives a shit about the money? You want to find out what happened to your loved ones, and now all of a sudden the sister and the mother are like, wait, time out. Maybe we really don't want to do that. So this causes bad blood between the Pieros and the Benedettos. So eventually a judge rules that the Benedetto family can go forward and offer the reward. Meanwhile, the case starts to pick up interest. The family, I'll tell you, you got to give credit to this family. I mean, they really push the cops on this. They go to America's Most Wanted, and they get the story covered. And the story comes in with 12 really good leads. So in July 2003, there's a break in the case when Michael Coblin was arrested in Point Pleasant, New Jersey, and charged with the murder of his in-laws. Now, they said I mentioned Brick earlier and Point Pleasant, New Jersey. That's on the Jersey Shore. I mean, you need money to live there. Well, there's a lot of good restaurants. It's a really nice area. So on appearance, the Coblins were doing well. Now, police say Michael Coblin traveled to his in-laws' house on Singer Island the day before Christopher disappeared under the alias of Mike Kerry. Now, why are you traveling with aliases? And he went fishing with his brother-in-law the day he disappeared, and he was seen returning in the boat alone. Cops also have witnesses that say Michael Coblin was seen driving around in the Toyota 4Runner that was recovered in the hotel parking lot days after Christopher Benedetto's disappearance. Police charge that Coblin killed his brother-in-law Christopher Benedetto on the boat and dumped him overboard because Christopher wanted his money back. Police also believe that Coblin killed his sister-in-law, Jeanette Piero, because she knew they were on the boat together. So this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment crime. It was well planned. The federal indictment, so this is how the feds got involved. The federal indictment also charges Michael Coblin with taking stolen jewelry across state lines. So anything across state lines potentially can bring in the federal government. So putting something in the mail that's bogus, trying to trick or defraud someone is mail fraud. The FBI and the Justice Department in like the 1920s, the Model Ts and cars were becoming more relevant in this country. They made it a federal crime, interstate transport of stolen vehicles. So now the feds are getting involved. What I'm guessing is, just my 2 cents, the Benedetto family, the Riviera Police Department wasn't moving fast enough. And they're cops, they know people, and they know how to get things done. They probably started working with the FBI and the Justice Department that they got the FBI brought in on this. So the federal indictment also lists an unnamed co-conspirator woman providing a false alibi, and threatening, coercing witnesses to lie to investigators. Who could that be? Could it be Michael Coblin's wife, Regina, perhaps? So what's interesting is that a year and a half earlier, at a federal bankruptcy hearing for the Coblins, Regina insists her husband, Michael Coblin, was in New Jersey the day her brother-in-law disappeared. And now remember a few years earlier when Regina Pirro and her mother fought the Benedettos in court to stop them from using $100,000 to solve the case? Well, a month before her husband is arrested, she and her mother, Doris, lay claim to the deceased sister's $500,000 estate, so they want their piece of the pie. I find that so amazing that they're going to fight you from using a $100,000 reward, and then after this guy gets declared legally dead, I'm guessing, and the sister is gone, then now they want their piece of the pie. So after Michael Coblin's arrested, he waives extradition. He goes down to Florida to face charges. So now investigators are starting to release details to the press. So what we find out is after Christopher Benedetto's disappearance, Michael Coblin shows up at a New York City jeweler to sell his sister-in-law's jewelry. We know Michael Coblin flew to Florida under assumed name before his brother-in-law's disappearance, and then a day or two later flies back to Newark. A friend of the Benedettos testified in Florida that Christopher Benedetto and his wife were arguing over the $165,000 to Michael Coblin, and that Jeanette Pirro warned her husband about her shady brother-in-law. The wife had a bad feeling about this guy, and she was right. Before she died, Jeanette Pirro told a friend that her brother-in-law was in town with her husband, and that Michael called from the boat to tell Christopher he wanted to take a shower before the three went to dinner. So another neighbor who lives around the block where he parked his slip was a lifeguard. Not like a kid, he was like a professional lifeguard, he was an adult. The neighbor sees Michael Coblin return home alone on the boat the day Christopher disappeared. And he thought that was strange because Christopher wouldn't let anyone pilot the boat except for a mechanic. And he also said that when Coblin brought the boat in, he appeared to be cleaning it up and wiping it down. So what's crazier about this is a couple of weeks after the cops get involved and they're going around asking questions, Michael Coblin flies down to Florida and he jumps in a car with the cops and they're going around talking to neighbors. Well, this lifeguard who provides information to police says he almost dropped dead. He says the cops show up and who's in the back seat of the car with them but Michael Coblin? And he said Coblin looked at him and realized he wasn't just like the gardener or something. He realized he lived there and recognized him. And he said Coblin looked at him if looks could kill. Michael Coblin had a criminal history prior to this for burglary, gun possession, larceny, and passing a counterfeit check. So you get the general idea. He's a scumbag and a bully. On March 10, 2005, Michael Coblin was found guilty by a South Florida federal jury in the deaths of his brother and sister-in-law. So Michael Coblin's brother, Mark, said he hadn't spoken to his brother in years because he had issues with him over the same trucking company that leads to Christopher Benedetto's death. And he said in an interview after his brother-in-law's conviction that he couldn't believe how his sister-in-law, Regina, who's married to his brother, stood by him despite all the evidence. And on March 21st, 2005, a federal judge sentenced Michael Coblin to 2 consecutive life terms plus 10 years in a federal prison. So that's essentially guarantee you're never going to get out. And in the feds, you've got to serve 85 or 90% of your sentence. So at his age, it was essentially a death sentence. But this is what found me striking. The judge said he was convinced that Michael Coblin snuck into Palm Beach County under an alias, lured his brother-in-law on a fishing trip before killing him and his wife. That's a ballsy move for a federal judge to go on the record like that, because if the case, for whatever reason, got overturned on appeal, he's going to hear it from his law school buddies at the next law review meeting at the country club. So the judge was really disgusted with this and put his balls on the table and basically stamped it with his own 2 cents after the jury had convicted him. So Michael Coblin's convicted in May, and less than a year later, he drops dead of a heart attack in a federal prison. So it's sad that the family had to wait 7 years to get justice. But I mean, hats off to that family, because I think they're probably a real pain in the ass to police and the investigators. And I'm not knocking the Riviera Police Department. I'm really not. But sometimes these small police departments, they need help. They're not doing homicides day in and day out. And, you know, his cousin Arthur was an NYPD detective. He had 2 brothers that were cops. So I think if not for them, this case would have taken either longer to get solved or perhaps it might not have gotten solved. I think the Riviera cops knew initially it was Michael Coblin, but probably the state attorney's office wasn't going to give them the green light, said it was circumstantial. We're afraid of taking this to trial. Then if he gets acquitted, you can't go after him again with double jeopardy. So it's just a sad story. And like I said, I came across it because I thought he was a retired NYPD detective, but his family was on the job. So I hope this case brings closure to the family. So as always, I want to thank everyone for tuning in, especially my listeners in Lawton, Virginia, which is home of the Auto Train, Mount Sinai, New York, Melton, West Victoria, Knievel, New Jersey, Mountaintop, Pennsylvania, Woonsocket, Rhode Island, which is home to the great Rocco Baldelli. If you work in law enforcement or have an interesting criminal background, please drop me a note on Twitter, Instagram, @VicFerrari50. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit the like and subscribe button. If you enjoy the content, be sure to check out my Amazon author page where you can preview all my NYPD books for free, including my latest and greatest, NYPD Presumption and Dysfunction. If all goes well, I'm going to have an interview with Marique Bartolis from the 105 Precinct, NYPD detective. And I'll see you guys later this week. Take care.